The evening light stretched across the surface of Lake Como, like a giant mirror reflecting the sky as it slowly turned into a shade of honey. The mountains surrounding the lake appeared softer beneath a thin layer of mist, as if they were folds of a gray velvet curtain. Small wooden boats drifted lazily, leaving behind circles of ripples that widened and then disappeared into silence. In Tatsin, Elena Rossi sat by the window of her old stone house. The house stood on the edge of a small village, where narrow cobblestone streets wound between red-tiled rooftops. Here, people had known each other for generations, and every church bell echoing through the valley seemed to bind their hearts into one rhythm. Elena gently closed her eyes, letting the breeze from the lake caress her cheeks. The scent of jasmine from the little garden behind her house drifted into the room, mingling with the fragrance of aged wood and the faint aroma of herbal tea. Her hands rested upon the piano, its surface darkened by time. Each key, though worn, still carried a resonance, as if it held the memory of countless evenings filled with music. For Elena, music had never been just about striking the keys. It was the breath of life itself. She remembered vividly her childhood days, when the sound of her piano filled the family cafe. Guests would pause their conversations to listen, and the whole room seemed to glow as if lit from within by melody. She pressed a gentle chord, letting the sound expand through the room, blending with the quiet lapping of waves outside. Every note felt like a thread of silk, connecting her to memories, things that had passed, yet still lingered close by. Elena was 28 years old, an age balanced between unfinished dreams and the steady weight of maturity. Her face carried the calm beauty of an Italian woman, her chestnut hair falling loosely over her shoulders, often tied back when she worked in the kitchen or tended to her flowers. But in her deep brown eyes, there remained a quiet fire, a longing that had never faded. Music. Her village was small and peaceful. In the mornings, a market gathered in the square, baskets filled with fresh vegetables, cheeses, and local wine. People greeted each other with friendly nods, their laughter weaving between the calls of the vendors. At noon, when the sun climbed high, life slowed down, as if the entire village breathed in rhythm with the lake and the mountains. And in the evenings, lanterns glowed from every window, spilling golden light onto the streets like fallen stars scattered across the earth. Elena cherished all of this, yet her heart belonged to another world, a world of piano keys, of melodies that carried her far away. The house she lived in had once been part of the family cafe. Many years ago, La Campanella, her parents' cafe, was beloved throughout the region, not only for its strong, rich coffee, but also for the little concerts held there. Even at the age of 10, Elena would sit at the piano and play, her tiny hands gliding over the keys as if telling a story. Guests marveled at her gift, pausing mid-conversation, enchanted by the child who seemed born of music. Now, the cafe existed only in memory. Life's storms had swept it away, leaving Elena with this house and an aging piano. Yet, instead of dwelling on loss, she treated music as a way to keep the most beautiful fragments of the past alive. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the lake. Elena inhaled slowly, then exhaled, pressing a few notes with gentle care. The sound was neither loud nor hurried, but soft, like a whisper. It was her way of speaking to her, self-transforming the unspoken feelings of her heart into melody. That evening, beneath the golden glow that spilled across the water, she let her hands wander into an improvised song, a piece without a name, without an audience, just her and the sky. Each note seemed to soothe old wounds, as if laying a tender light upon her memories. In that moment, Elena was no longer a 28-year-old woman with worries weighing on her shoulders. She was once again the little girl sitting in the cafe filled with the scent of baked bread, playing piano while her parents watched with proud, Hindley smiles. The music lingered, the lake grew still, and the mountains melted into the softness of dusk. And Elena, resting in her quiet world, knew that her story was far from over like a song that had not yet found its ending. Elena's earliest memories were woven with the sound of piano keys. Long before she could read, her tiny fingers had already found their way across the instrument, pressing notes with clumsy curiosity. At first, it was nothing more than scattered sounds, but to her parents, every attempt was precious, a glimpse of the gift they believed their daughter carried within. Her father, Marco, often said the piano was not just an instrument but a companion for the soul. He would sit beside her, his rough hands guiding her smaller ones, showing her how each key could speak differently, some bright as sunlight, others soft as the hush of twilight. Her mother, Lucia, would listen from behind the counter of their cafe, humming along as she polished glasses or arranged pastries. The cafe was always alive with warmth. Morning brought the rich scent of roasted coffee beans, mingled with the sweetness of fresh bread. Customers filled the small space, their voices blending into a comforting murmur. And in the afternoons, when the rush had slowed, Elena would climb onto the piano bench. At first, only her parents listened. Then, gradually, so did the customers, smiling, clapping softly, or simply pausing to let the music wash over them. For Elena, those moments felt like magic. The cafe seemed to transform whenever she played. The chatter quieted, the air grew lighter, and even the sunlight through the windows appeared gentler, as though leaning closer to hear. She loved the way music could change a room, how it could gather strangers into a single shared silence. As she grew older, she began to understand that music was more than sound. It was emotion given form. A joyful tune could make people laugh, while a slower melody could bring tears to their eyes. She realized she was not just pressing keys. She was telling stories without words, painting landscapes that existed only in the imagination. At night, after the cafe had closed, her father would sometimes take her outside. Together, they would sit by the lake, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. Music, he once told her, is all around us, in the water, in the wind, in the beating of your own heart. The piano is only a way to bring it out. Those words stayed with her, etched deeper than any lullaby. Yet, alongside the beauty of her childhood, there were moments of struggle. The cafe was small, and money was often tight. Her parents worked long hours, and sometimes Elena could sense the weight of their worries and the lines on their faces. Still, they never let hardship dim the joy of their home. If anything, it made the music more precious, like a lantern glowing brighter against the dark. By the time she was 12, Elena had already composed her first melody. It was a simple tune that repeated itself like the rocking of a boat. But when she played it for her parents, her mother's eyes shimmered with tears. "It sounds like the lake," Lucia whispered, calm and endless. That night, Elena fell asleep with a smile, dreaming of stages far bigger than their little cafe, and audiences who would one day listen as intently as her parents did. Dreams of music carried her through her teenage years. While her friends talked about school or travel, Elena's thoughts always returned to the piano. She practiced for hours, sometimes until her fingers ached. She studied old scores, tried to imitate the great masters, and slowly began to develop her own voice, something tender, reflective, shaped by the quiet rhythm of the lake and the simple beauty of village life. And yet, even as her dream grew stronger, so did the world around her. Responsibilities, expectations, and the unpredictable turns of life waited just beyond the horizon. She did not know then that one day, everything she held dear, the cafe, her family, her certainty of the future, would be shaken. But in her childhood, none of that mattered. There was only the music, the laughter of her parents, and the endless waters of Lake Como reflecting the stars. The years drifted by like quiet waves on Lake Como. Elena was no longer the little girl who played for cafe guests, but a young woman, her music ripened by time and longing. She dreamed of taking her piano beyond the village, of sharing her melodies with the wider world. Yet life, as it often does, carried both gifts and shadows. The first change came quietly, almost unnoticed. Her father, once strong and tireless, began to tire more easily. The spark in his eyes dimmed as illness crept into his days. At first, he brushed it aside, insisting it was nothing. But Elena could hear the strain in his breath, see the weight in his steps. Soon, the cafe hours grew shorter. The laughter that once filled the small space softened, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Her mother tried to keep everything as it was, serving customers with the same gentle smile, keeping the shelves stocked, polishing the tables until they gleamed. But Elena saw the weariness behind her smile. The cafe that had once been a beacon of warmth was beginning to flicker. Elena played more often then, as if her music could hold the walls together, as if each note could keep sadness at bay. She played for her father, who would sit in his chair, eyes closed, listening with a faint smile. She played for her mother, who sometimes hummed along while wiping away quiet tears. And she played for herself, for the girl who still dreamed, even as reality pressed harder against her world. Then, one winter evening, the turning point arrived. Snow fell thickly outside, blanketing the village in silence. The cafe had closed early, its windows dark. Inside, the air was heavy. Elena sat at the piano, her hands trembling, unable to press the keys. Her father's illness had worsened, and the doctor's words carried little hope. That night, she realized the cafe would not last much longer. The heart of their family, the man who had taught her that music lived in the wind and water, was fading. The cafe, without his presence, would lose the very soul that had kept it alive. When it passed, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The cafe closed its doors for the last time. Its windows shuttered, its rooms filled only with memories. The smell of coffee, the hum of conversations, the applause after each of Elena's songs, all of it was gone, like a melody cut short. For weeks, Elena could not bring herself to play. The piano sat in silence, its keys gathering dust, as though mourning alongside her. She wandered the empty cafe rooms, listening for echoes that no longer came. Life outside continued. Markets opened, church bells rang, children laughed in the square. But for Elena, the world had grown unbearably still. And yet, grief has a way of softening with time, like snow melting into the earth. One quiet evening, Elena sat once more at the piano. Her fingers hesitated, then pressed a single note. It lingered in the room, fragile yet alive. Slowly, she played another, then another, until a gentle melody filled the air. It was not a song of joy, nor of despair, but of remembrance. Each note carried the weight of her loss, yet also the warmth of what had once been. She understood then that music was not only for happiness, it was also for healing, for carrying love forward even when the people who gave it were gone. The cafe was no more, but the piano remained, and so did she. That was the turning point. Not a grand moment, not a sudden change, but a quiet realization. Her story with music was not over. It had only taken on a different shape. Outside, Lake Como mirrored the stars. The water, steady and endless, reminded her of her father's words. Music was everywhere. In the wind, in the waves, in her heart, and as long as she played, he would never truly be gone. Seasons turned quietly over Lake Como. The cafe remained closed, its wooden sign faded by sun and rain. Yet, life in the village went on. Elena, though still carrying the ache of loss, began to notice once more the small beauties she had nearly forgotten. The shimmer of morning light on the water, the laughter of children skipping stones by the shore, the fragrance of fresh bread drifting from a neighbor's oven. Her mother, though subdued, encouraged her gently. "The world hasn't ended, cara mia," she would say softly, brushing Elena's hair behind her ear. "It has only changed, and we must change with it." Those words, simple yet steady, became a quiet compass guiding Elena forward. She began spending more time by the lake. Each evening, she would walk the familiar path where she once sat with her father. The water's rhythm comforted her, reminding her that even in sorrow, life flowed on. Sometimes she carried a notebook and sketched fragments of melodies that came to her mind. They were not grand pieces, but soft reflections of what she felt, inside, gentle, unfinished, like whispers caught between waves. The piano, once silent in the corner, slowly awakened. Elena would sit before it at dusk, letting her fingers wander. At first, the notes were hesitant, as though searching for courage. But gradually, the music returned, flowing more freely each day. Her melodies were different now, less innocent, more tender, touched by both sorrow and resilience. Neighbors began to notice. Passing by her window, they paused to listen. Children sat quietly on the steps outside, their eyes wide, enchanted by the music drifting through the evening air. One night, an old fisherman left a small basket of figs at her door, a silent token of gratitude. Another day, a young mother whispered, "Your music helps me sleep." Without realizing it, Elena had begun to give again, sharing her gift, not in crowded concert halls, but in the simplest of ways, with those around her. The village, once only the backdrop of her childhood, now became her quiet audience, her gentle stage. One morning, while tending to a small garden, Elena found herself imagining something new, not reopening the cafe as it once was, but creating a space of her own, a place where people could gather not only for coffee, but for music, for rest, for calm. The thought grew in her mind like a seed, fragile, yet full of promise. She spoke of it to her mother one evening, her voice unsure. To her surprise, Lucia smiled, her eyes reflecting both memory and hope. "Your father would have loved that," she whispered, "a place where his daughter's music could live on." From then on, Elena's days took on a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for the garden and the market, afternoons for planning, and evenings for the piano. She began clearing one of the old cafe rooms, sweeping away dust, polishing the wooden tables, and opening the windows to let in the scent of the lake breeze. The room brightened, as though awakening from a long slumber. Though it was only the beginning, Elena felt a quiet strength stirring within her. She was no longer the child who played for applause, nor the young woman crushed by grief. She was something new, someone who carried her past tenderly, yet also walked forward into the unknown. As twilight descended over the village, Elena sat once more at her piano. Through the open window, her music drifted into the night. The lake reflected the fading light. The mountains stood watch in silence, and the village listened. It was not the grand stage she once dreamed of, but it was enough. It was real. It was hers. And in that moment, with her fingers resting lightly on the keys, Elena understood. Every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. The days settled into a tender rhythm, each one flowing softly into the next, like ripples on the lake. Elena no longer measured her time in years or seasons, but in melodies. Each day offered her a new chance to play, to let music drift from her open window, carrying her heart into the world beyond. Her little house, once silent and heavy with loss, began to feel alive again. The piano, with its weathered keys, no longer seemed tired. Instead, it had become her companion, breathing alongside her, responding to her every thought and feeling. She discovered that even the simplest tune, just a handful of notes, could hold entire worlds of emotion. The villagers continued to listen in their quiet ways. Some left small gifts at her doorstep: a jar of honey, a loaf of bread, a sprig of rosemary tied with twine. Others would stop her in the market and say, "I heard you playing last night." It was like a prayer. Elena would blush, humbled, realizing that her music reached further than she imagined. Children were her most devoted audience. On warm evenings, they would gather outside her window, their chatter falling silent as soon as her fingers touched the keys. They listened with wide eyes, some swaying gently as if rocked by the notes. When she finished, they would clap softly, not loudly, but with the sincerity only children carry. Their presence reminded Elena that music was not only for the past, it could nurture the future too. One evening, as she played by candlelight, Elena felt something stir within her. It was not the old ambition of grand stages and bright lights. It was quieter, gentler, yet deeper. She realized that music did not need to be heard by thousands to matter. Its true gift was found in the way it touched even a single soul. She thought of her father's words, how music lived in the water, the wind, and the beating of the heart. She understood them now more than ever. Her father's voice was gone, but his wisdom remained in every note she played. Her mother, sitting nearby with knitting in her lap, often closed her eyes, listening as though the music carried her back to the days when the cafe was alive with warmth. And for Elena herself, the music was a bridge. It connected her to the past she loved, but also carried her gently forward into a future not yet written. She no longer feared endings, for she had learned that each melody, even when it faded, left behind an echo that lingered in the heart. On one particularly still night, the lake lay calm, the stars scattered across its surface like diamonds on silk. Elena finished her song, let the final note linger, and then sat in silence. She realized then that she was not alone, not truly. Her father's memory, her mother's quiet strength, her neighbor's gratitude, the laughter of children, all of it lived in her music. That was the quiet gift she carried. Not fame, not applause, but connection. A thread of sound, invisible yet unbreakable, tying her to others, tying her to life itself. And as she closed the piano lid for the night, Elena smiled softly, knowing that tomorrow and every day after, the music would be waiting for her. One late afternoon, when the golden light stretched long across the lake and the air held the gentle coolness of early autumn, Elena was sitting on a stone bench near the water. She had brought with her a small notebook, filled with fragments of melodies and half-written verses. Sometimes, she'd like to sit outside instead of at her piano, letting the sights and sounds of the lake guide her pen. The surface of the water glimmered like glass, broken only by the slow glide of a swan. The faint rustle of reeds whispered at the shore, and somewhere far away, a church bell chimed the hour. Elena closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling as though the whole world was keeping time with her heart. It was then that she noticed someone walking along the narrow path by the water, a tall man with a worn leather satchel slung across his shoulder. He walked slowly, as though savoring each step, pausing now and then to look at the lake. His clothes were simple, but there was something thoughtful about his manner, something unheard. As he drew nearer, he caught sight of Elena and offered a polite nod. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm and steady. Elena returned the greeting, her voice soft but warm. She wasn't accustomed to strangers lingering by this quiet stretch of the lake. Most visitors kept to the busier parts of town. The man paused, then gestured gently toward the notebook on her lap. "Are you writing music?" Elena hesitated. Few people asked about her notebook. "Yes," she admitted at last, "though mostly it's just sketches, pieces of songs that may never be finished." He smiled faintly, as if he understood. Sometimes, unfinished songs are the most beautiful. They leave room for silence. His words startled her in their simplicity. She found herself smiling back, a little shyly. "Do you play?" "Sí. Husk it." "I used to," he replied. "The violin, but life has its ways of pulling us in different directions." His gaze drifted to the water. "Still, I like to think music never leaves us completely. It waits, even in silence." The two of them sat in companionable quiet for a while, listening to the gentle lap of waves. Elena felt no need to fill the silence. It was enough to share the stillness with someone who seemed to understand it. At last, the man rose to leave. "Thank you," he said, almost as though she had given him something, "for letting me sit here." Before Elena could reply, he added, "My name is Adrian. I'll be staying in the village for a short while. Perhaps our paths will cross again." And with another quiet nod, he continued along the path, soon disappearing into the curve of the trees. Elena watched him go, her notebook still resting on her lap, the unfinished notes staring up at her. She traced a line of music with her finger, then added a few more measures, the melody flowing more easily than before. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt lighter, as though the lake itself had whispered a promise that her music, like her life, was not yet finished. The days passed quietly, as they often did in the village by the lake. Elena returned to her piano, to her notebooks, to the gentle rhythm of mornings filled with music and evenings, softened by candlelight. Yet, in her heart, she carried a small spark of curiosity about the stranger she had met, the man named Adrian. It was a week later, on another crisp afternoon, when their paths crossed again. Elena had gone to the market square to buy bread and fresh figs. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts, and children darted between stalls, their laughter echoing through the cobblestones. As she moved through the crowd, she heard a familiar voice greeting the baker. Adrian stood there, a bundle of books tucked under his arm. He noticed her at once, and his face lit with a quiet recognition. "Elena," he said softly, as though her name were already familiar to him. They walked together through the square, speaking of small things at first: the weather, the harvest, the changing leaves along the hillsides. But soon, their words deepened, as if some invisible thread pulled their thoughts closer. Adrian told her he was a teacher of literature, traveling through different towns to lecture and study. He had come to the lake seeking rest, much as Elena had once sought solace in her music. When he asked about her compositions, Elena hesitated, then invited him to her home. "Only if you don't mind unfinished songs," she said, with a gentle laugh. That evening, Adrian sat near the window while Elena played. The first notes rose hesitantly, like a bird testing its wings. But as her hands grew surer, the room filled with music that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. Adrian listened intently, his eyes half closed, as though the melody carried him somewhere far beyond the walls. When she finished, silence lingered between them. Warm and full, Adrian leaned forward, his voice low. "You've given me something tonight, something words could never hold." Elena felt her cheeks flush, but she smiled softly. "It isn't much," she whispered. "It's more than you know," he replied. From then on, their meetings became a gentle rhythm of their own. Sometimes they walked by the lake, their steps slow, conversations meandering like the path itself. Other times, they sat together in the little sitting room, where Elena played and Adrian listened, occasionally humming a line or suggesting a phrase. One evening, he brought his violin. Though it had been years since he had played, his hands remembered enough to coax out a tender melody. The notes trembled at first, but soon found their footing, weaving with Elena's piano in a harmony that felt both fragile and eternal. As the music filled the house, Elena realized something profound. She was no longer playing alone. Her melodies had found an answering voice, one that did not overpower but blended, lifting her songs into something new. The music between them was not grand or polished. It was simple, imperfect, human, and yet it carried a beauty she had never known before, the beauty of being shared. That night, as the last note faded into silence, Elena looked at Adrian and saw a reflection of her own journey. Someone who had known loss, yet still believed in the quiet miracles of life. And in that moment, she understood that music had not only given her healing, it had given her a companion to walk beside her on the path forward.